My name is Kay Ness. I'm a neurodevelopmentalist with ICANN, which is International Christian Association of Neurodevelopmentalists. My personal journey in this work, I started out as a chemical engineer, and I had my own company and all this, and then I had a child, and it changed my whole life, actually. When I had a child, I had never even changed a diaper. So I started researching and learning about development and learning. I had studied Montessori stuff. And I went to an organization up in Philadelphia called the Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential, which is where one of the real founding people of this work was, Glenn Doman. You may have heard of that organization from back in the 50s and 60s. And based on that work, I started working with my son when he was 12 months old. He became a fully automatized reader by 24 months old. And I was always fascinated with learning about brains and why some people are capable of doing things and why some people are not. What makes some people smart, what makes some people appear stupid, and what can we do to best help our children. I had a Montessori school when he was little. I learned and started dealing with lots of issues. He had mobility issues and sensory issues when he was little, even though he could read really well, and behavioral issues. He was still holding on, going up and down stairs at 3 years old. He had a bad hip sling and low muscle tone, and very tactily defensive, I'm sure. Those that have dealt with sensory issues are aware of those terms. So at 3.5, I was working with a group out of Philadelphia, and we weren't making much progress, except he could read really well. And so I started working with the National Association for Child Development at that time, and it had more specific stimulation type programs. So I worked with them for 12 years, and I started doing this work full time. And this is where the Lord has me. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what my mind always came to, and I completely gave up the engineering field, and I'm doing this full time. But my background is science, and I think that's part of the Lord's sense of humor, to take us through certain paths so we can check and validate the work that's being done, that all the people that are doing this work aren't just educators or whatever. So I found it very handy to have that kind of background coming into this. The reason I do this is because over the years, 19. Over the last 19 years I've done this work. I've consistently seen that labels and expectations given by the experts to parents about their children are incorrect. And I've seen children consistently overcome issues and problems and go beyond expectations as far as what they were told. Like you have a child that's brain injured at birth, and they were told to institutionalize this child. And now the child's reading and doing all kinds of things. You have a child with learning disabilities or dyslexia. It's supposed to be a permanent disability. But continually we've seen children overcome these issues, and even adults too, and go on to achieve far more than the diagnosis and experts predicted. So there's a couple of principles. You know, if you have a child that's struggling, you know something's wrong, and you go around and you search and try to find answers for your child. And this, being a parent is one of the hardest jobs in the world. You have all kinds of things to prepare you for other things in life, but not much to prepare you for being a parent. And a parent of a child that's struggling is really frustrating. And you go and search for answers, and it's really hard to find those answers. So my heart is totally in this work. It's totally with the parents. I hear the calls all the time. And you'll see one of the papers I wrote in there is, I get the calls from frustrated parents that they've tried all these things and spent all this money and their child's still not achieving. And that's because of how the child is being viewed by the psychological community and the educational community. So my goal here is to give you information so you can look at your child in a different way, evaluate them functionally, and try to figure out what the root causes of the problems are that your child is having. And then I'll give you very specific things you can do with your child to help them overcome those problems. So do not think that any label or any problem your child has to be permanent. And there's a couple of things. We're promised trials and tribulations and frustrations in our life. That's part of how God keeps us tuned up, how He keeps us humble, and how He keeps us searching. So don't let that overwhelm you, all right, the trials and frustrations that you have. It will make you stronger, and it will make your children stronger. And also, when we are seeking counsel for our children, Psalm 1 tells us that we have to have, don't seek counsel of the ungodly, that we have to seek counsel of people that share our worldview. And so anyway, my basic premise is that children are made in the image of God, and all children are basically intelligent. All human beings are intelligent. That when I first started in this work, I wasn't a Christian, and I thought we were actually making kids smarter. But I no longer believe that. What I think we're doing is we're allowing them to access the intelligence that's there because they are made in the image of God. And I've seen this consistently in children that are very, very brain injured. I had one boy come in a few weeks ago that was 18 years old. He had very severe cerebral palsy. He couldn't see. He couldn't move. His legs were scissoring. And yet he could hear and understand and respond to everything that was said to him because he couldn't talk. But he obviously knew what was going on because he would make noises and things when his mother said things that were incorrect about him when she was talking about him to me. So obviously the intelligence is there. Our job is to create a situation, help our children overcome problems that allows them to utilize and access that intelligence. All right, so that's kind of my personal story. In 1999, a group of neurodevelopmentalists from across the country came together and formed a Christian organization. And mainly because there's lots of New Age stuff out there, and we thought it was time that we came together to assure parents that we had a common worldview with Christians. Some of the New Age stuff we saw being used actually could damage children. And it was being marketed heavily into the therapeutic market. So there's lots of controversy about it. But anyway, that was our basic goal. It was like God told us it was time to separate ourselves and so that parents are assured that we do share the same worldview. All right, my way of looking at children is quite different than the evaluations you've had in the past. How many of you had evaluations of your children and labels applied and all this? Okay, so you go through these battery of tests, and they test what your child can do and can't do, right? And you might take a day or two and cost a bunch of money. And then you get a list of what? You get a list of, well, your child can't read because they're dyslexic and they score this on that scale and so forth and so on. But it doesn't tell you what you can really do. It'll give you some ways to compensate to help the child learn and say, okay, this is kind of his learning style. So sit him close to the teacher and have fewer distractions and use some visual aids and blah, blah, blah. You don't really get any way to address the root cause of what's causing the problem with the child. So your child, your kid you thought was pretty smart, all of a sudden is permanently disabled. And that's the way the educational psychological community views human development. The neurodevelopmentalist work it actually started back in the 40s with the work of Dr. Temple Fay, who was a neurosurgeon, looking at he was working with brain injured children. And he looked at what we could do to to the central nervous system to stimulate it so people could function at the highest level as far as just below their brain injury. And his work was followed by Glenn Doman, I told you about the institutes, and Carl Delicato, who worked up the developmental profile. And what they came up with was the fact that we know the brain develops in a stepwise fashion. A newborn baby can't do very much. They don't feel very well, they don't see very well, they don't hear very well. Their movements are disorganized, they can't process anything. But the normal environment organizes that brain and allows the child to function more and more appropriately in his environment and intelligently. When something goes wrong, when the child is injured, then the child might not walk, they might not hear, and some part of that developmental process is stopped. So what the Doman Delicato did was work up a developmental profile that we use today to look at the inputs to the brain from birth level up to what we call neurological organization on the major inputs and the major outputs of the brain on how we function. I'll get into the details of what that is later. So we know the brain develops in a stepwise fashion. The other real key to this work is the fact that the central nervous system is very plastic, very changeable. With specific stimulation, you can actually change the sensory input, the brain, the way it processes that information. You actually change the function and structure and chemistry of the brain. You physically change it. It is not fixed. So when people talk about, all right, we've got 9,327 dyslexic kids, and we did a PET scan, and we decided that they absorb glucose here, and that their language center is mixed, and all this. I don't get all excited about it. All right, I don't care. Or we say, we've got all these autistic kids, and their brains are different. It doesn't matter. All right, if we apply the specific stimulation, we can normalize that brain, and that's a totally. There's no doubt about that that's true. There's absolutely no doubt that that's true. All the research shows that neuroplasticity is a true concept. But the world of education, the world of psychology, is working off a fixed brain model. Now there's a few people that are using the concept of neuroplasticity, a few therapists, some people that do sensory integration, some people that do certain types of therapies are working off the model. Actually, who's familiar with the term sensory integration? You've done it all, haven't you? The sensory integration guys actually got their work from Carl Delicato. So they grew out of the neurodevelopmental work, right? So my job as a neurodevelopmentalist is to evaluate where the child's functioning right and wrong, design a specific stimulation program that I teach the parent to do at home with the child several times a day, and then update that program. She's rolling her eyes. It's not that hard. Several times a day. Short, quick. So this is what I do. I design programs to help children function better.